This is I-95.5 FM, TNT's most influential name in radio.
So it's been 50 years since the creation of soca music. And as is usual with so many art forms, so much has happened to the original genre. It's probably hard to pin down one definition now. I may be wrong about that, but whatever it is, soca has become an all-encompassing catchphrase to define the music that can now be heard in carnivals around the world. Anywhere else but at carnivals, well, world-famous American DJ D Nice was seen playing soca at the White House lawn during the 4th of July celebrations this month. Today, to help us explore the evolution of soca, is music analyst Nigel Campbell. Nigel, welcome.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you for having me on your show today.
Tell me, is soca a music genre or a rhythm?
I think it's both. I mean, the idea of genres, musicologists know what a genre is, and it defines a particular style of music which incorporates rhythms and other things. And that can be used to categorize a whole range of songs and that kind of stuff. That notion of a catchphrase, I'd use that sentence in an article I wrote for Caribbean Beat, is something that clearly would define a genre, so that music from all the way back from Ed Watson and Lord Kitchener and Shadow, and of course infamously Ras Shorty, at the time he was Lord Shorty, coming all the way up to every modern singer, and including other genres of music like bouillon from Dominica and Dennery segment from St. Lucia. In Trinidad, if it playing at carnival time, it's called a soca, which may be a misnomer and which may be actually doing a lot of damage to the art form, but be that as it may, that's what it is. But soca certainly at the beginning, of course, Lord Shorty has been credited with that. There's a lot of controversy about that, and there's been challenges to this origin story. And
is the origin story important anymore?
Well, one of the things that I do note is that in a lot of new world music, from jazz to calypso to reggae to bossa nova to reggaeton, the idea of one person inventing a piece of music is kind of ludicrous. However, even hip hop, but which I think also celebrates 50 years, based on the fact that DJ Kool Herc played at a party at his sister's party, literally 50 years ago, I think this month or something like that. And the idea of an origin story is something that is great for a narrative to carry a whole story forward. But the music grows, we know it, we hear it. Sometimes music grows and moves away, right? Calypso hasn't died, but if somebody came and landed in Trinidad now, today, we're going to hear calypso.
Yeah, but well, in addition to which,
but it exists.
In addition to which, calypso never stayed the same.
Calypso evolved, musically, in terms of the tones, in terms of the verse structures and that kind of stuff. But certainly I think what soca was or is an evolution of calypso. So that there was a point, I remember when we were pushing this big rush to get a Grammy for soca, Martin Mice-Raymond, who's a professor at UTT, who was also a member of the academy, had spoken to people in the academy, and they had an option. They said, why don't you just say traditional calypso and modern calypso? The word soca, as much as we utilize it, and it's now become the norm, the name of anything that plays at carnival time and what we understand it. You know it when you hear it kind of thing. Probably doesn't catch on with the rest of the world, because that word calypso had a lot of cachet.
Still does.
Before Belafonte, going all before Lord Invader. So that they know what that is, because, that's music from Trinidad. But right now, we have a situation where, certainly in terms of the American music industry, the broadcast industry, the streaming industry, that soca is now part of what they call reggae. They actually have definitions where they have reggae, and as a subcategory of reggae is soca. And we have modern artists who actually, to make sure that they get their music, put up on playlists and that kind of stuff, they willfully tag their soca songs as reggae. So these words and these names and these definitions are hard to hold hard and fast. But we as a society want to make sure that we name things, because naming something gives us some kind of credibility.
Do you think that soca satisfactorily reflects the breadth of experiences, of emotions of the human person, or is it simply just a fet music?
Well, I that is the kind of nerd I am. Some years ago, I actually I attempted to listen to, there are about 600 tram releases, particularly I think it was about 2018 or something like that. And to listen to 600 tracks takes days, right? But so you could just get the gist of the song within the first verse and maybe the chorus, right? And a very large percentage, I'm not going to accurately pinpoint a number, but certainly more than 70% of the songs were about the carnival experience, right? Being in a fete, and specifically a fete, which is part of that carnival experience. Of course, there were other songs that spoke about little social commentary, about love songs and that kind of stuff. So in terms of a range, and these are, of course, lyrics, because lyrics is what defines certainly songs, right? Music is music, but a song also has lyrics. So those song lyrics, as I said, define a carnival experience, a party experience. But there are a number of other songs that cover everything, from scandal to social commentary. The City Could Burn Down, jamming still. That's still a classic for me. But and Super Blue famously telling Mr. Robinson, do something carnival. And just the hook line was, get something and wave. But that's all we know the song has. But the song itself was a social commentary. But as I said, there are other elements that the society is bigger than a carnival party. But because of that narrow definition and because of that narrow grouping of lyrics and songs into that carnival aesthetic, fete aesthetic, I remember we used that word last time I was on the show, we have now kind of identified soca as just carnival music, full stop, which unfortunately is not going to help us broaden our appeal globally. But certainly within the markets that we do operate in, when we say a soca artist, we know exactly what we mean. It has a definition and it's working commercially.
You wrote in Caribbean Beat that there was a time when soca mimicked whatever was hot in its quest to break out of the cocoon of carnival festival music and become the new popular music. Now, is this the kind of thing that you're talking about?
I know what you're doing there.
Now listen to this. Is that the kind of borrowing that's happening in soca?
Well, as I did say also in that article, was there was a period of time. This phrase of that soca mimics anything that is popular was a phrase that Joe Brown is a famous producer. He worked at Charlie's Roots and he worked with Shorty himself. And Joe Brown was on a podcast that I had with Laura Dorridge, and he said those words, that soca mimics everything. And I thought about it because at that point, as we all know, it's Carnival, hugely popular song written by Colonel Robert, sung by Destra Garcia. To a person for the layman who doesn't know will hear Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper. And we also heard Caribbean Blue, which is a song by Enya that mimicked, or I should say, Band of the Year by Patrice and Machel mimicked that very closely. And famously, Aha, which is a Norwegian group that had a song called Take On Me, and that was the kind of basis for Bonnie and Clyde, another Destra Garcia song.
You mean this?
Yes.
That's what you mean?
We're kind of like that. As I said, there's let's not fool ourselves, right? Those were songs that were hugely popular, certainly among a grouping of audiences in Europe and in North America. And I'm going to say this controversially, of people that didn't song and talk like us and look like us, right? So there was an idea, at least I thought, this is my theory, and it's not any kind of disparagement against the composer, that you look for songs that may not necessarily be the most hugely popular in Trinidad, and kind of freely sample or freely interpolate the song, thinking it'll be original. But people say, well, hold on a second, I know that Enya song, I know that Aha song, right? And but time after time...
The world is too small now.
Well, yeah.
Somebody will pick it up.
Somebody will pick it up ultimately, right? But they
Well,
also...
let us presume that the soca artists got the rights and so on. They cover their bases and so on.
I've checked some of the credits, and some of the credits don't fully reflect that as yet. I mean, they also did The Police, Every Breath You Take, became Footsteps. And U2, Biggie Irie out of Barbados. Still haven't found what I'm looking for. It's a song by U2. And I can never remember the names, but Biggie Irie had a song. He won a groovy soca, the first groovy soca monarch. He won it with that. Dominic Caliprasad is on a mission.
No, I'm just have observant. I'm just observant. So the young people would say I was today's years old.
That surprised me when I heard you posted that, I think, the other day. And I was very surprised. I said, you didn't know that? I mean, that was like common knowledge. I think, as I said, incorporating or interpolating pop melodies to get an audience who could sing along much easier is not necessarily a bad thing, because
Right.
a person can argue seriously that music that Little Richard wrote, or music that Chuck Berry wrote in the in the mid to late 50s, was copied almost note to note by the Beach Boys and even by the Beatles and that kind of stuff as brand new songs. There was this idea that early rock and roll all sound the same, but just with different lyrics. Early blues, blues has a particular scale and that kind of stuff.
No, but these are identified songs. These are not. That's not a melody
Yeah,
you're
and
playing.
that's what
I read you're playing. Ding.
As I said, and it continues. So there's this idea that you can utilize pop melodies and soca-fy it, or
yeah.
use that phrase, and just change the lyrics, because the copyright really only takes the melody, which is the words, what you hear when a singer sings, and the lyrics. So basically, if you take away all the music, basically what you hear a singer singing, that's what copyrightable. The bed of music could be something else. I could sing a particular lyric over another piece of music. At one point in jazz music, fellas like John Coltrane would take the harmony of another piece of music and then blow a solo that is completely different.
Those are
and
the
create
melodies.
something
Those are
new.
the melodies we're listening to.
Yeah, but in
Well,
context,
not
Ni-
100%.
In context, Nigel writes in Caribbean Beat that what he calls these singular achievements marks the continuing broader struggle for soca to break out into the wider public consciousness beyond Carnival.
Well, what I was saying at that point was that I had in an early essay that was not necessarily published in a magazine, I was doing this kind of comparison between soca, dancehall / reggae, and reggaeton, or Puerto Rico, DR, and those countries. And we're talking about if soca is 1 million, dancehall is 10 million, reggaeton it's more than 100 million. These reggaeton artists drop billion view videos on YouTube, right? The identified number one soca video on one particular channel by a Trinidadian was Kes, Hello, right? The most popular song by a Trinidadian is Champion by Dwayne Bravo, right? You see your laugh.
Because of India.
But because of India.
Yeah,
yeah.
You
It has
have
to be
laugh.
because of India.
Yeah,
Because
because
the Indian market,
the market, it was 100 million views, right? Because his focus is that
smart.
song on a market, right? So the music markets are all segmented, I should say. But in terms of our music, we know that dancehall and reggae they have reggae festivals in Netherlands, in Australia, all over the world and thing. But soca music, because it's so closely identified with that.
Kachav is now playing in Belgium.
Yeah, right. But there's another idea that one of the most popular, two most popular songs, soca songs, identified soca songs, were "Turn Me On" by Kevin Little and "Tempted to Touch" by Rupee. That's 1-2 in terms of numbers, just due to the kind of charting streams on Spotify as well as YouTube plays and that kind of stuff. And it became obvious that those songs didn't necessarily talk about Carnival. They basically it's about sex. Turn Me On, Tempted to Touch, right?
But more than that, those were soca. Those were songs with a soca rhythm, a soca flavor,
and that's
not heavy soca.
Well, you see,
I mean, like power versus groovy kind of thing.
power and groovy, those are phrases that were created by William Monroe to market.
Yeah,
Those were
it's a
Right?
marketing tool.
But
yeah.
there's something identifiable about, and people have told me, I
You
don't
see, those songs struck a chord. They touched an emotion in
Yeah,
the
Kess's
human
Hello
being,
is more popular.
as Kess,
Yeah.
Kess does. You know, the
Right
heavy
now-
soca's, they don't.
Yeah.
They just make your heart.
consider
go thump,
It's
thump,
Carnival,
thump.
the song that you identified first, by Destra Garcia. It's still played in parties 20 years later, and it's definitely a bigger song out, right? But it had a certain rhythm and a certain speed, because playing mass on a Tuesday, getting ready to cross the stage, you have to have a certain amount of energy. I have rum in my head, probably a little bit of weed, and need energy to cross that stage and play myself, right, for the cameras. And nice groovy song like Hello, I ain't a fat, a whining, different thing.
Environment.
That's Juve morning.
Yeah, both songs are called soca.
On the road, yeah.
Right? One, well, I won't say one, but and one kind of aesthetic of soca has a broader appeal. The groovy songs actually, because they're more melodic, right? Think of a power soca, da 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 da. That's not a melody, right? Da 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 da. Up down up down. A melody has, you know it when you hear it, kind of stuff. The rhythm or the chord structure may be one chord. Funk had one chord. James Brown songs had one chord, but he had thing.
So what would you say? Let's say this piece plays in terms of the story of the evolution of soca. Let's listen to this. Ed Watson, Lord Kitchener. So Ed Watson was on one of the early Mr. Soca's.
Well, yes, as I said, although I kind of started the article about to get to a 50-year mark, you have to start with a number, right? And as I said, there's this narrative that Shorty has used. Of course, he invented soca. He tried to unite the African Indian rhythms, and the first soca was in Drani. That came out in 1973. So let's say, okay, we're going to start with that, right? That certainly doesn't reflect what Ed Watson was doing, but there were musicians in the studios, in KH Studios. There were other arrangers. Ed Watson was a very prominent producer at that time. I think Ed Watson actually produced Ndran, if I get my maths correct, because I have the graphic here somewhere, but I know his name is on the Ed Watson at the Koto were two important producers who were kind of evolving calypso, tent calypso into party calypso, right? And so Ed Watson and of course Lord Kitchener famously with Sugar Boom Boom in 1977, he kind of changed the whole thing. But there's this idea that the one person inventor kind of thing, as I said earlier, it kind of holds on, but you could include in that, as I said, Shadow. You could include in that King Wellington.
Shadow say, I don't want to sink that soca boat.
That was an argument between he and Shorty. That was a beef they had at the time in the Enquatin song. But Robin Imamche is another person whose name needs to be put in there in the mix of persons who was early experimenting, as well as I said, those musicians who were in the studio who actually said, you know what, I'm going to try a drum pattern. And the producer say, I like that, keep that. The drummer doesn't necessarily get the credit, right? But the drummer may be the person who there's a famous example of James Brown's drummer, Ed Stubblefield. He created this particular funky rhythm that became the basis of a lot of sampling of early hip-hop. They beat the funky drummer. And they said, okay, we're just going to sample that drum pattern. Stubblefield said he did it first, and he and the bassman came in and they fell in. James Brown came in the studio and said, oh, that sounds good. And then he just, sang over that kind of stuff. James Brown's name alone is on the record. Mm-hmm. And Stubblefield says, well, I never got compensated for it. So there are a group of people, a community of musicians, certainly here in Trinidad. And of course, there have also been arguments that there were these musicians from Trinidad and artists like Shorty traveled up the islands. They went to Dominica, they went to Martinique, and they heard these kind of rhythms that existed there that didn't necessarily exist here. And they said, I like this rhythm, see if you can remember it, and let's try it. So there's this kind of fluidity certainly among the whole Caribbean, which kind of suggests that soca is now Caribbean. And as we all know, some of the top producers aren't necessarily Trinidadians. They're Vincentians and Dominicans. Family, that very popular song that won the Road March. Skinny Fabulous effectively wrote that, and Marshall and Bunchy put on their verses, so their names are credited. It was produced by Dada, a Dominican, basically a bouillon rhythm, right? So that you have this amalgam of Dominican music, written by a Vincentian, sung by two Trinidadians and a Vincentian, to get around the rules of what can be a road march or what cannot be a road march. And that is now all called soca. There are people in Dominica who will argue with you, no, that's not soca. Bouillon is not soca. People in St. Lucia will say, listen, hold on a second. All this soca is soca, that's Trinidad thing. Our thing is Dennery segment. And they will argue. I was in St. Lucia for the jazz some months ago, and they will tell me straight up, soca is Trinidad thing. Our thing is something different. So I utilize the phrase that in Trinidad, it's a catchphrase for everything.
We in Trinidad and Tobago seem to be creating so many things for the world. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what tangible benefits we're getting from it in Trinidad, although it's nice that we're sharing it with the world and so on.
that becomes a matter of the business of music. That's a whole other topic in a sense, because
Well, you're a music businessman.
well, yeah, but but that, as I said, it's a little more than simply we created soca and Buster Poindexter. We created soca. Charlie actually was the original recording engineer, may have co-produced Hot 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 by Arrow, right? Charlie gave us a story when he was here for Carifesta that Arrow said, I wanted to go on my own way, and he basically bought back the masters from Arrow and then released it on his own label. And we know the rest of that. But Arrow's song, as you know, was covered by Buster Poindexter, a popular American musician. And it charted. It's in the midsection of the American pop charts. And for a while, that was soca, right? It's still done. Amazingly, I don't know if you remember, some months ago, or probably last year, there was a person who was making a brand of rum, right? And he was able to get an American journalist, a television journalist, to come to Trinidad.
Bacchanal? Is it Bacchanal?
I ain't want to call your name because I don't know if they pay the bills.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Well, let me just say it's more than 9 and it's going to 1, right?
Yeah.
But needless to say, the American journalist said all she ever knew of Calypso was Harry Belafonte. And this was in 2022. And I'm thinking to myself, what? So you never heard of soca? Right? And the idea of how we get our message out, and this is why I talk about breaking out of the cocoon of Carnival, because even in North America, it's still within the cocoon of a kind of diaspora market. Now, the diaspora market is not to be ignored.
Absolutely.
Right? And because they're doing more positive things than, say, 20, 30 years ago, they've actually now be part of the American system, and they identify themselves as Caribbean people, and they're actually holding on to 2 passports and doing a kind of back and forth trade with.
In fact, we're speaking during Caribbean American Heritage Month.
In June, that just passed, yes, and I saw that the U.S. Embassy recognized in their 50th anniversary hip hop, CARICOM, and soca. Right, kudos to them. But I think one of the things that we have to do acknowledge is that in terms of the breakout, reggae, I've always suggested, had a father in Chris Blackwell, the record label owner. He had Jimmy Cliff initially, and of course he had Bob Marley, and reggae now is identified as Bob Marley, and behind the scenes is Chris Blackwell. We didn't have a Chris Blackwell for soca music. We've had soca artists, we've had pop artists who have sang a soca. We have modern popular artists like Nicki Minaj, I think, jumped on somebody's soca tune and sang a verse on some other body's soca song. I can't remember who it is right now. But nobody's ever championed it outside of a very niche market. And as I said, we kind of tried to jump on a band. At one point, we were singing on hip-hop artists were coming on and singing along with us. We've done the reggae and the dancehall kind of thing. As I said, we've done EDM, electronic dance music, which is hugely popular in Europe. Now we're doing Afrobeats. It's a global phenomenon. And trying to do something to make the music, quote-unquote, more popular out of that little niche market. As I said, we're talking about the reggae market the dancehall market is 10 times bigger.
No, but when we do these blending, is it not that we are gobbled up by the other music?
Well,
and nobody notices the soca. They hear the Afrobeat, they're not hearing soca. To them, that is.
One of the things that I think every artist wants to do is to link up with somebody who's bigger than them and kind of piggyback on them, right? So if somebody has a major artist as their co-singer and the major artist has billions of fans, they don't care. They'll just make sure that their name is prominent.
Follow the money.
Yeah.
But the idea is the music itself gets lost.
Well, I think the other thing is, as we've been saying all throughout, the music has this kind of fluidity, right? So that at one point, I remember a good friend of mine, Michael Auchitung, Ming had asked a question, what is soca? Is it about the singer or is it about the music, right? And there was this kind of challenge that went out to some of these aggregators that as long as you're Trinidadian and you put out a piece of music, it's soca. So somebody had written this piece of music that was not identified as soca, it was a kind of a rootsy music kind of thing. And they just said soca released 2020, whatever year it was. And I remember thinking, well, why did you put that as a soca if the artists themselves don't even call it soca? So we have a situation in our music industry, certainly unlike the American, let's say, where they have genre identifiers. This is rock and roll, this is pop, this is this, right? And although you can cross over, which effectively meant that black people were singing and getting on the white pop charts as it was, and everybody else, that they're kind of segmented markets, and they're able to measure within those segmented markets. We have a very serious problem in terms of measuring our success and what happens, even with analytics on all the streaming platforms and things. Just the last couple of days, Wednesday to Friday, go on Music TT had a music conference called ReverbX, and we were talking about this notion of data. Myself and Laura had a panel with Dr. Joan Tull talking about festivals, and we're talking about data measurement. And it's a hugely either difficult exercise or a non-participatory exercise. Promoters don't get information, artists don't give information, so that as much as what we do know is what is provided by platforms. So we could see how many counts there are on YouTube, on Spotify, and that kind of stuff. But artists wouldn't tell us how much people are in effect. Promoters ain't telling us that. They ain't telling the police that.
Yeah, so
that.
I've been longing to ask this question. There seems to be individual efforts and maybe individual cases of success by individual artists out there. But one doesn't get the impression of a formalized collective strategy coming out of Port of Spain.
Preaching to the choir. Dominic, sit back. The other thing that is a problem, and certainly in terms of our music industry, that has been identified, is the notion of a kind of advocacy voice, a kind of collective association. We have a collective of steel bandmen. We have a collective of calypsonians. We've recently had a collective of promoters, effectively Carnival Fete promoters, right? But I think they have the ability to broaden their base, including jazz promoters, gospel promoters, whatever. But that is not enough, because in terms of policy, which is normally created by the government, they only want to hear the voices of collectives, a TTMA, a chamber, that kind of stuff, right? So that has been a deficiency, right? That notion of a collective association.
I think even the Supermarkets Association realized this, and now they're teaming up as a Caribbean in order to get negotiate lower prices.
There you go. But you talked about individual voices. One of the things is there are certain thresholds below which, if you want to get into a global business, a global acknowledgement, you can't go below those. And there are very few artists who have achieved that, right? You can call his name, Marshall Montano is at the top of the list, right? Fernand Destra, Kess recently. There's some other artists who are hugely popular who have not yet crossed that threshold. They may have had real associations and collaborations with. But if you're not doing the business, registering your stuff, registering your metadata, doing your accounts, paying your taxes, being on the chart as it was in terms of the eyesight of the business world, you kind of get ignored. And as much as you tell yourself, well, I just played a fete and the fete had 40,000 people, but I was one of 30 persons on the cast. They didn't come to see you. But you can always put that in your resume and say, well, I play a fete that had 30,000 people, right? So
I went to Glansbury and
that kind of stuff. So there is certainly a deficiency in terms of the music industry. You ask why it's not bigger. I don't necessarily think that Jamaica has it better than us, but there are more individuals, and there are certainly collectives and groups and companies and corporations within and outside of Jamaica that are accepting, acknowledging, and positioning dancehall and reggae music globally. We do have those numbers in terms of the corporate structure.
The artists themselves may be creating the impression that they're mere hustlers. They're mere hustlers trying to make a dime, and they're not trained or be prepared to learn about the business of the entertainment industry. So it's not just getting a gig here and maybe you can boast about you get to do a show in Brooklyn, but it's about learning the business, and also I don't get the impression that there is a concerted, strategic effort to get young people in the entertainment industry to be entrepreneurial, to see the importance of learning the business side.
You said two things there. The thing about the young people learning and the learning and being offered quote unquote courses on how to incorporate, how to do this kind of stuff. As I said, Music TT had this thing just recently, but Music TT has been in existence for 10 years, and in those 10 years I've been tracking Music TT as a government state-owned enterprise, kind of having some overview of the music industry. And they have, to their credit, offered courses in every aspect of the music industry, as well as COT, as well as the IP office for trademark, for registering your copyrights and that kind of stuff. And I've as a writer, I've gone to a number of these things, and the audiences are in the tens and the dozens. We have hundreds and hundreds of artists who don't go, and yet you're still hearing in 2023 that artists release wrong songs, and they still don't know who own the masters because they didn't register it properly. The metadata is not correct. So that use of that word hustler somebody before me had used the phrase that the music industry is a grand hustle, where relationships is something more important than talent. And it's something that I actually hold on to, because I also tell artists you better know somebody who knows
about
somebody.
relationships.
It's about relationships, right? But the idea of individual artists not coming to learn, I think that's bigger than the music industry, right? I mean, as I said, you can, it was the line, you could take a horse of water, but you can't force it to drink or something. So that it's not like there's not lack of trying, right? Why some of these artists are fascinated by a lifestyle as opposed to getting the individual businesses in order, so that they're not ripped off, so if somebody samples stuff and the person who's sampling discovers, well, he doesn't own the music because there's a producer somewhere else. We were getting some stories yesterday.
Is it, or isn't that, or shouldn't that be the role of a Tuco?
Well, Tuco's function, if I understand it clearly, was representing the Calypsonians, certainly in terms of their relationship, I think, with the government and with getting the word of what Calypso
and
what Calypso
educating
is,
their members.
and educating their members. At one point, Tuco offered a course on the business of music with Roy Tech, and I was offered, myself, John Arnold, we were lecturers. Basically, it's a 3-hour lecture on a particular course. And I remember being there at Roy Tech and asking one of the facilitators of this whole course, well, how many Calypsonians joined up, right? And they said this paltry. They had to literally offer Calypsonians a kind of, we'll pay for you to come to the course kind of thing. So it's not because there is not lack of wanting to offer a business course. The bigger issue is, how do all these individual creatives, beyond creating music, brilliant music for all we know, move beyond that and recognize, okay, we're no longer in a ad hoc hustle business. We're in a business that asks for certain rules.
So we're still in the days of invaders. Lord Invader. Yeah.
Well, Lord Invader.
Well, go up the whole islands.
Yeah, we were touring in those. We were touring in those times, and that particular case, everybody knows the story. Lord Invader wrote the song. Maury Amsterdam came, stole it, and gave it to the Andrews sisters. But one of the things that came out after that fact was to do it in court. The American court system, the defense lawyer for Amsterdam said, well, Calypso is folk music, and folk music is not copyrightable, which may be a kind of a thing that exists. It's more intangible cultural heritage. And the way that the case was won is a weird thing. Lionel Belasco, a pioneering music composer and writer here from Trinidad, he did that thing because in America you have to register your copyright. In Trinidad you don't register. So you'll come down to the Caribbean, hear some songs, and you knew how to notate the music, transcribe them, and then register it in the U.S. Copyright Office. So the melody for Rum and Coca-Cola is a old Creole song called L'Année Passée. I think it was Martinican song. And he transcribed it and put it up there. And the tent that Lord Invader sang in, the promoter of the tent used to print the lyrics on paper. So now we had a printed lyric and we had a music transcribed. And therefore, they had a case. If there was no lyric and no transcription, it's one word against the other. And I think in terms of, I've seen more recently in cases where foreign nationals are challenging the validity of persons copying or sampling their music with American courts saying, well, sorry, we don't accept that. You don't have a case because you don't have evidence. Evidence is, I want to see the lyrics printed. Evidence is, I want to see transcriptions or something. So records, right? Yeah. So, as I said, Invader wasn't not necessarily a hustler. I know that in the end, I think, although he won the case, he was given a lump sum of money by...
but he would have been a single person. But yes. the model was hustling men, going up the islands, going up to New York, do a thing, come back down the road. And that's still happening today. Women going up the Caribbean, New York, Canada, London. One
of the sad stories in this whole thing is, as I said, I'm sure you've probably been aware that for a couple of years ago, major artists were selling their catalogs. Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, Sting, and all these fellas. And certainly by the 90s, Calypsonians, there were a few Calypsonians who were actually selling their music. Famously, Lord Kitchener sold his catalog, right? And the estate of Spoiler got this, and I think Roaring Lion, he was still alive. He sold his catalog, right? And all these years later, now their music is being used. They as the artists aren't the ones benefiting, right? It's the person who bought the music who's benefiting, right? So that the idea of the business of music, it either came hard, and I've heard stories about Calypsonians who basically say, oh, that was last year music. I'm only concerned about what's going on this year and going forward. So that it's almost like toilet paper. They use it, and when it's done, it's done. Nobody looks backwards. Nobody wants to look back at toilet paper, admittedly. But that's probably a bad example. But the idea of the intellectual property value.
That's a library.
Yeah, they don't have it, right? So we don't own a lot of music, and it's not necessarily only exclusive to Trinidad and Tobago. It happens throughout the Caribbean, in the Americas. People have written songs. Famous blues musicians have written songs, performed it, recorded it. Led Zeppelin will come on and copy it note for note and claim they own the copyright because they transcribed it properly. Man, you can't do nothing about it. They have many examples of as we've seen, it's written, Black American musicians of a certain era were ripped off. Straight up. In our Trinidad situation, I think there can be an argument that there's, aside from the pop melody takeover, that some of some soca songs, the famous thing, they all sound the same. Mm-hmm. Now that we have AI and all that kind of stuff, there's certain programs that can analyze a song and then transcribe it. And I'm sure if you put a couple of them together, it'll be note for note, word for word.
Yeah.
And nobody's challenging.
A lot would be revealed with this AI technology when some people sit down and start analyzing.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
So where are we now with soca?
Well, as I said, 50 years later, when it started, let's just for the argument's sake, we're going to start with Shorty's. Let's start with 1973, whether it was Shorty's song or somebody else's song in 73. Let's start with 73. Between 73 and now, there was a growth. There was an era when entrepreneurs, Charlie, I mentioned his name earlier, Granville Straker's Records, Michael Gould, who had a record label called B's Record. They were all based in Brooklyn. And they were doing the business of music. The people were recording those in the 90s up to probably the late 90s and then 70s and the 90s. They were recording on vinyl. Some of them had evolved into CD. And they were able to get the music out there among a market. But even those businesses were certainly focused and centered within a Caribbean community, right? They're all in Brooklyn, effectively, right? And no disrespect to them, but a label like VP Records, which represented reggae music, owned by the Victor and Pat Chin, that basically is the number one reggae label, they were able to get a relationship with Atlantic Records, which is a subsidiary of a major American label. I remember asking Charlie, how come you were never able to get a relationship with a major label out when you had this catalog of recordings after all this time? And he basically said how they were not interested in soca music because they saw soca music as basically carnival music. And that's what they said about our music. The music has grown in the sense that I think there are more entrepreneurs who are doing the business of music. Certainly the audiences are much, much larger. So artists are now able to perform at stadiums. Marshall is doing a stadium tour right now in North America. But even here in Trinidad, at fetes and things, people are having fetes, 10,000 people in a party and that kind of stuff with their name as the kind of focus and thing. How that translates into a kind of global uptake, we still have days to come. But everything is relative. I mean, there's some people who suggest that what we have is good enough. There's some people who will also say, well, we're not good enough yet. I think that there's a lot of work to do. I think that notion about definition in terms of what is soca and what is not soca it's just too fluid to make a difference.
Are there any signs that the soca music is evolving into another kind of soca music?
Well, as I said, because we kind of, I won't say mimic, but we kind of follow the what's hot, as I said. There certainly is what is happening now in terms of the hot songs now, which if you hear it with your eyes closed, you think there's an Afrobeats vibe to it. It's certainly not what happened when Ed Watson was making music back in the day. So certainly musically there's an evolution. Of course, instrument-wise, the electronics have taken over. We've now proper recordings and that kind of stuff.
Marshall, who has the gift of gab, has sort of led the way into soca's association with the Afro vibe.
Like the gift of gab. He may not have been the first, but certainly has a connection.
Yes, and he's articulated it.
Yeah, he has the connections also. We could have Wizkid on his show, right? And these kind of fellas, Burna Boy could hang with him and that kind of stuff, right? Not everybody can get that kind of connection, right? And because of his popularity, when somebody says soca, they say, oh, yes, Machel Montano, right? So there's some positive in terms of having an individual career that supersedes everybody else. But, and I don't necessarily think he's leaving out anybody. But I know for a fact he's one of those persons who looks for standards. Don't come with a demo and tell me that, well, it's a hot tune because your friend tell it. He understands the business and he operates at a level that is completely different from a number of other artists, right? And if everybody could get on that headspace, I think that'd be a positive move right now.
So
taking us
is it
forward.
likely that our soca music can influence or is already influencing other genres of music?
Well, the thing about Carnival, as I said, soca is, to me, is no longer Trinidad music. I think it's Caribbean music, as I said earlier. And we have producers from St. Lucia, from Dominica, from Barbados, all over the islands, at one point even Jamaica, who are producing soca songs, and St. Vincent. And one of the things I think is, although as much as I could, as people will tell me, well, in St. Lucia Carnival, they just play Dennery segment. I hear soca music because our soca artists here from Trinidad dominate all these other carnivals. So that I think that soca music has certainly become Caribbean music in terms of its influence, in terms of its dominance, right? And certainly North America and all those carnivals that our expats have taken globally, right? But there was a situation, I think, in the last Notting Hill Carnival where people were playing Afrobeats straight up and dancehall, so that soca was kind of being relegated to the bottom of the pile. The Caribbean diaspora is identifiable outside there. We now have to fight for our position within the Caribbean diaspora, and we have to fight for our position outside of a carnival in that Caribbean diaspora. Once that happens, or once we continue to do that, I think we're going to be in a better place than we are today.
Do we need superstars now? I ask that in the context of usually when you hear people speaking about, let's say, sporting events. If you don't have a superstar somewhere in the world, the sport flattens in popularity.
To me, there's a context for what a superstar is. A superstar is only identified once you have, to me, a lot of media representation.
Well,
so our football stars are football stars because we have media covering them,
right,
and global media at that, right? We don't have global media covering our stars. We have local media. And aside from radio stations such as this, and not all in print media and that kind of stuff, our features departments have been decimated.
No, but who's responsible for that?
Well,
is it the business of soca or the newspaper?
I don't know how to convince. I mean, as I said, this particular radio station certainly plays a lot more local music than other radio stations, right? And individual programmers and owners of stations know why they don't want to play local music, all right? How do we get popular? I think there's a link between media support, whether it's traditional media, even modern media, new social media support, and the creation of superstars, as we call them, right? Marshall worked hella hard. His 40 years he's been doing this plus to get his position, right? Voice recently, I think, has jumped leaps and bounds among a certain demographic. Younger people love him, right? And he has a very large following and that kind of stuff. But we need a lot more than just the top 5, as it was. If you have like a top 20 who are doing that level of business, then we could say we're doing things.
To some people, the face of Calypso/soca is still Sparrow.
Well, Sparrow,
which to me is, I celebrate, I honor, but it can't be Sparrow in 2023.
Well, Sparrow in 2023,
By the way, I think today is he's 88 today.
88 years old today, right? And he doesn't look like the Sparrow of the 1960s and 70s.
No, certainly, yeah.
Right? And his voice is not the same. So there are people who still say the king of rock and roll is Elvis, and Elvis has been dead for many years.
Yeah,
right?
but who's selling? Not Elvis.
Well,
generations have been selling since
but
that.
then consider reggae music. Somebody had done the analysis. The only reggae album on the Billboard 200 charts is Legend by Bob Marley. And it's still the number one selling reggae record. And even when they do the modern reggae chart, which is a chart that is put out by Billboard magazine, they have every artist gets on it. The numbers don't have to be large to get on that chart. You could sell 500 records and you could be number one. But then you always have Bob Marley, or by extension, his kids, who all carry the Marley name, right? So that there's the idea of a one person dominating a genre. It's a classic case of that for reggae, right? Dancehall is a little different. They clearly have more persons who are doing dancehall. Shaggy, Sean Paul and others, Vibes Cartel, all these others, Beanie Man and others. But in our situation, Sparrow and Calypso, yes, I think Kitchener should be the number one. To an American audience, it's still Harry Belafonte, unfortunately. But for soca music, yes, the name that may pop up first may be Marshall Montana, but I think there are other names. But they need to get to that level of business acumen and marketing power and structure and that kind of stuff to take the whole genre forward. Can't go by one person.
To me, Marshall, Bungie, Iowa, Kess, they broke the mold in that waiting on the media. They didn't wait on the media.
No, You have to
took
create
charge.
Yeah, you have to. Sometimes you have to create your own stories. You have to.
Yeah,
You have to
and
be
they
your own
did.
media
They did.
person.
Yeah.
Ideally, create good stories. I mean, don't create stories where you're slapping people in jail and that kind of stuff, right? And losing your visa. Those aren't stories that you want to have, right? But I think that generally,
Yeah, there was always the Brat Pack. There was always the Bad Boys.
They were-
Frank Sinatra
yeah.
with the Bad Boys.
in America, but they had protection. We ain't had that kind of protection here and thing, right? But consider something. We've been talking
Yeah.
about soca for the last I don't know how many minutes, but what is the hottest new music out of Trinidad and Tobago? It's not even soca music. It's what they call Trinidad and Zest, right? Which is what Trinidad. I was at a thing at the at UE the other day where a guy who's doing his PhD was telling us that Trinidad is kind of about gunman talk, and Zest is about sex and other kind of other activities. But it's certainly to me a kind of evolution of soca / rap / dance hall. So at this notion,
Is that the future?
well, it's huge to
Well,
the point that
if the youth have bought into it,
and
that's
they
the
have
future.
no radio airplay.
That's the future right there.
They have no radio airplay, but they have huge uptake. As I said, there's a whole generation that don't depend on a station like I-95. Right?
And there's no radio airplay. Is it because of the lyrical content?
The lyrical content kind of limits what can be based on
What can
kind
go
of-
on broadcast.
Kind of this kind of broadcast code that's voluntary right now, as opposed to formalized. But the idea of gunman talk, let's be honest, I don't think necessarily. Certainly, back in the 90s when gangster rap had dominated, they couldn't get on the air. So they made clean versions, but you have a clean version when every second word is being bleeped out. So you have a song, it doesn't take you there, right? But as I said, that is a hot new thing now, and this is a kind of evolution of music that I don't think necessarily think that rap so had its genesis within the carnival environment, right? But there was a certain similarity, I thought, between rapso and calypso. I mean, you had Brother Recession in the studio some years
but
ago.
certainly
when
the
he spoke.
griot, they
Yes,
were
and
the
you
griot,
talked about that
yes,
with
yeah.
griot and the rhythm of the word and the power of and it's the rap and calypso and thing. But that's what it is.
To me, Rapso was the vehicle I was pushing out
Yes,
there.
but
Rapso.
nothing stays the same
Because of the
and
cultures
really,
and the
really, I
rhythms
think
and
that
so on.
the what really drives music is what the young people like.
Definitely.
And they tell you basic is give the people what they want.
What
It's
they
not what
want.
you want to give
Exactly.
them. It's not what you like.
No, but each generation makes its own decision.
Just
agree.
remember one thing: the music
that-
industry is not about good; it's about popular.
Exactly, exactly.
And that's to answer the singer. The question: it's the singer, not the song. It was a statement
and-
years ago. It's the
It-
singer, not the song.
It's what popular
Song
among the
helps.
young people, and if Trinidad is it, then
So be it.
What
50
can we
years
do?
later, soca is still here. Soca is still
Exactly.
evolving, and I don't think soca is going to go anywhere. Just like I don't think calypso.
Is rock and roll
Well, you know,
evolving?
Rock and roll has
Is blues
evolved.
evolving? Is rock evolving?
Well, consider something,
What is-
eh?
We like the West Indies out.
No, hold
We
on.
still
Rock
going around the corner.
evolved out of blues, right? And everything has evolved out of that, out of that.
But they're distinct. They have their you could pick them out of the crowd.
As I said, it
let's
comes
say
back to
he
people
doesn't
wanted to
think soca
codify
is
that.
going to go anywhere. I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
Whatever is whatever is popular. Whatever is popular.
Care by 95.
I wish we could go on, but
Yes.
Nigel Campbell, music analyst, thank you very much
Thank
for
you very much for having
devoting
me.
some of your Sunday afternoon with us.
It's been
And-
fun.
And thank you everyone for listening.